Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, the child Elvis once. And we're on the Circle G. It's sometime in May or June, early June, 1967. On the 10th, Elvis, Priscilla, many of the guys and their wives will begin to travel across the country, stopping at the Grand Canyon and having a wonderful adventure as a family as Elvis returns to Hollywood to film Speedway with Nancy Sinatra. But that's coming in the future. We're not there quite yet. We're still on the Circle G. And when we come back from this song, we're going to hear directly from Elvis himself. So I know you guys are going to be looking forward to that. But right now, we're going to listen to this song that tells the story of Elvis sneaking out of his house at Palm Springs to get married. Hi, Marion. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate seeing you guys here. This is Christina at midnight.
Slipped out the back with a bullhorn hawk over stucco walls where the flashbulbs stop. Joni's got curlers, Joe's got the cash, Danny K's in the cockpit, burning jet fuel fast. Sinatra's bird, she's purring like a prayer. Christina's wings cut the desert air. Brad's not on the list, he's pacing the floor, while the Carlos got the press in a ballroom wall. Rona's got a sin and a Polaroid grin, but the ring's in a case with the diamonds grinning in. $15 for a license and a lie, while the best men shine with a bullseye tie. Blinded by the flight, wrapped up like a vow in the Vegas night. Blinded by the flight, with a heartbreak hitch in the morning light. Oh, we were flying on a secret stream to a chapel dream, but the brother got burned by the wedding machine. Palm Springs whispers, Bland's got the suit, but the real show's hidden in a velvet beat. Mama's flown in, Daddy's eyes are wide, while the Memphis boys are split on the right. Fitch opens up his velvet chest, bullhead complaints, diamonds in the west. But Red's got a wound that won't sit still, he's shouting down love from the windowsill. Color's got a script and a phantom plan, he's dealing out silence with a sleight of hand. You got too many, he says with a grin, let go of the love if you want to win. Blinded by the flight, ran up like a vow in the Vegas night. Blinded by the flight, when the heartbreak hits you the morning light. Oh, we were flying on a secret stream to a chapel dream, but the brother got burned by the wedding machine. Christina's wheels kissed the tarmac clean, and the ring was slipped before the world had seen. But love, oh love, it don't run on time, it breaks in the silence, not the headline.
Thank you for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today we're going to hear echoes directly from Elvis. But we're going to start by remembering what we looked at yesterday with a quote from one of our favorite authors, Albert Goldman, who had a strong dislike for Elvis. And he said now everyone had to get in the saddle and play cowboy. That meant even the enormously obese Lamar, whose horse reared up one day and threw him violently to the ground, to everyone's vast delight. And we heard that story yesterday in a lot more detail. So if you missed it, be sure to head back into the archive after this episode and check out those stories for yourself. Now, George Klein, who had been Elvis's friend since high school, but they really became tight in 1957. And they were friends until the end of Elvis's life. And George, he was a good friend. He said, "I much preferred a Cadillac to a Palomino, and never felt comfortable being up in a saddle, though Elvis did insist that I get up on a horse a couple of times." So George, he felt that same discomfort that Marty Lacker and Lamar Fike felt when they got on top of these horses. And I'm sure George did prefer that Cadillac to that horse that Lamar was on. And Gunn says, was reminding us that Danny Kaye was the pilot who flew Elvis to his wedding in Frank Sinatra's Learjet. So, was he a pilot? Did he have a license? I have to assume so. Because if I was Frank, I sure would have been scared to let him fly if he didn't. But I didn't know Danny Kaye was a pilot until I heard this story. I have to be frank and honest about that. But Gunn says that she saw Danny Kaye in movies many times and that he was very popular in Sweden. That's interesting. I did not know that. And that Gunn would have never guessed that Danny Kaye was friends with Frank Sinatra and Elvis. Maybe it was just for a free plane ride to Vegas. I don't know. I have to assume he flew them back as well. And then that makes me think he went to the wedding. But nobody mentions in any of the stories that he was there. Some newspaper articles do mention he was the pilot. And other people mention he's the pilot. But nobody says, oh, yeah, he was there at the party with Elvis. But if he flew Elvis back, I kind of feel like he must have been. And so George Klein, he prefers the Cadillac that Elvis gave him for Christmas, 1966. It was a brand new Cadillac convertible. And George already had a car. It was only a year old. It was a 1966 Chevrolet convertible, which Elvis then took. George gave him the car when Elvis asked for it. And Elvis gave that Chevy over to his friend Gary Pepper, whose family needed a car to drive. And it was still a really nice car, and it was a convertible. Now we're going to hear from Elvis in a magazine article. And this magazine article was actually published on July 26th, 1967. So a little bit after the period that we're talking about. However, these magazine articles don't just print themselves. Somebody's got to have an interview and they've got to write the thing up and it's got to get typeset. And there's a lot of front end production that has to be done in order for it to end up in a magazine. And that usually takes about 60 days, at least. So whatever information is in this magazine is most likely from sometime in May. But we know it can't be from May because Elvis isn't doing any interviews in May. He's been married and he's off on the Circle G. So the last time that anyone could have probably interviewed Elvis was in April while he was filming Clambake. I don't know where they got this information from yet. But as we look through, we need to look for those clues and see if we can figure out when Elvis said these things. But we know that it's got to be sometime before May, because there's just not enough time in the timeline to have, or an opportunity to have, an interview after that that's published in Australia on July 26, 1967. And Marion is asking if Danny Kaye is a comedian. He was an actor, and I believe he was in comedies, and I'm not very familiar with him myself. So I probably am going to have to watch a few Danny Kaye movies. But I think he had a television show at the time. I'm not positive about that, but he was well known and everyone knew his face. And I do think he was something about a comedian. And Gunn says that yes, she remembers going to the movies with her father, and that Danny Kaye was in family movies. Yes, absolutely. Danny Kaye was a family movie kind of guy, just like Elvis. And this is the magazine right here. You can see it before you. It's everybody's magazine, and it's an Australian publication. And you can see this is the cover story. Elvis Baby. Will it be a girl or a boy? Now, on this end of history, we know that Priscilla is going to give birth to Lisa Marie in February. And that when you do all the calculations, it sure looks like she got pregnant the night they got married. Or very, very close to that. So, the fact that this magazine is printing this article from our end makes it sound like, oh, they're talking to Elvis while Priscilla is pregnant, and he knows that he's about to have this child. But that is not the case. Because of the way this timeline works, and this had to be an interview in April or previous, Priscilla wouldn't have been pregnant at that time. But the magazine does know, I believe, that he's about to get married. And therefore, there's an anticipation he's going to begin to have children. And that's more about what this article is about. But because it says, will it be a girl or a boy, and it's on the newsstands in July, shortly after Elvis got married, it sure sounds like they have some news to tell people. And I bet it sold a lot of copies. So whoever put the title and the front cover together, which would have been done probably, since this came out on July 26th, I'm going to guess 2 weeks before that. They kind of nailed down that cover as close as they can to the actual publication date so they can align the cover with the current news to try to get the maximum value out of it. It's just like a thumbnail for a YouTube video. And Gunn saying that she remembers Jerry and Dean Martin, and Marion is asking if that's what Danny Kaye was like. So I'm not positive if that's what Gunn's saying, but I think Gunn's also telling us she watched Jerry and Dean Martin movies, which would have also been kind of family movies. I'm sure Elvis watched those too. Elvis loved Dean Martin. And I think it had to be a lot more than just Dean's singing ability. Dean had an ability to talk to a crowd. He really held them in the palm of his hand. And as an entertainer, there was almost no match for Dean. So I'm sure that Elvis was I mean, I know Elvis really liked Dean singing, but I'm sure he liked him overall as an entertainer. And this magazine, I don't have the actual article to show you, but I do have the text from it. And it's by Alan Hunter in Hollywood, and we've heard from him before. He's been writing for this Everybody's for a while now, during 1967, and we've heard a couple of other things that he's got out there, but he's a guy that's in Hollywood, and he's writing up these stories and sending them to magazines around the world, in this case, Australia. And the title is, Will It Be a Boy or a Girl? And it starts with a quote from Elvis. And the quote is, when I get married, I want the whole of it. A good wife and a house full of kids. That's something I've longed for. My own kids. So I'm just going to read this quote from Elvis again. I think it's really important. Elvis says, when I get married, I want the whole of it. A good wife and a house full of kids. That's something I've longed for. My own kids. We've heard Elvis say something like this before in a previous magazine article. And I don't think this is the Elvis machine talking. I don't think these are statements that are being driven by the Colonel. I think Elvis talked to Alan, and he told him this, and that these are heartfelt statements from Elvis. Now, obviously, Elvis is going to be guarded with a journalist. He's not going to tell him all the secrets that he has. But this is something that he's putting out there for public consumption, that he wants a wife and he wants a house full of kids. He wants his own kids. And Alan says, Elvis Presley told me this a couple of years ago on the set of his film, Frankie and Johnny. So this isn't a recent statement that Elvis made. This is a longing that he's had since at least 1965, because it was 2 years before, according to Alan Hunter. And in the statement, Elvis says it's something I've longed for. So he's longed for it since before 1965. So here we are in 1967. This has been something that Elvis, he's been thinking about. And Alan says, Elvis has always been enthusiastic about children. And since he married Priscilla in early May this year, there has been constant speculation around Hollywood about when the couple will have their first child. So Alan's basically telling us he doesn't know that Priscilla's pregnant. That's not what the news that's being broken in this story. This story is about Elvis's desire to have children, not the fact that he's about to have a child. Nobody knows that yet. Now, by the time this article is published, people know it. And Alan says one Hollywood rumor is that Priscilla is already pregnant. Although Presley's aides have denied it, you can bet the Presleys will start having children very early in their marriage. So Alan's probably making this statement sometime in June. Or maybe, well, yeah, probably sometime in June, something like that. He knows that they're married, but he doesn't know yet that Priscilla's pregnant. But people are rumoring it. Of course, they don't have any reason to rumor it, because I don't think even Priscilla's told anybody at this point. I don't think Priscilla knows until about a month in. So again, with the timeline and everything, I don't think it would have been possible for anyone to actually know, or for those rumors to be true in any way. And Alan says, it is certainly Presley's wish to have a family, which has now inspired him to marry. So Alan isn't making a statement about whether Elvis loves Priscilla or not. What he says is Elvis is married so that he can have children. And Alan says, Elvis has been in love with Priscilla for several years. Well, so Alan does now make a statement about Priscilla. And Alan says, for many months before the marriage, she was living at Graceland, his Memphis home. So we've heard that there was a lot of pressure for Elvis to get married because you can't live unmarried together. But Alan puts it into this article, and for many months before the marriage, she was living at Graceland, his Memphis home. He doesn't write it in here as a scandal. It's just a statement of fact. And that Elvis had been in love with Priscilla for several years. So there's a recognition from Alan that Priscilla has been publicly known for years, and that for the last many months she's been living at Graceland, and that has also been known. Because if it had not been known, this would be a scandal, and it would be more than 2 lines within this article. So the amount of pressure that could have been brought to bear against Elvis, I don't know. It doesn't really seem to be there, at least in this article. And the next part of this article says, but before this year, Elvis had been reluctant to marry Priscilla because of his career. Elvis knew he was bound to lose some of the adulation of teenagers when he ceased to be a bachelor. So Alan, who is somebody writing for a magazine that Elvis sometimes has interviews with, and Alan knows the Hollywood scene, but he believes that the reason that Elvis is getting married and did not get married prior was for his career, because his fans would not want to see him married. Now, we hear that a lot. I don't know how true that really is. But Alan's putting it here in the magazine. And so we can see why other people believe this. It's in print. People read it. The article goes on. Now Elvis has made the sacrifice. He has decided to put his wish for a normal family life first. And that means children. So again, Alan has tied back Elvis's desire to be married to children specifically. And Gunn says a house full of kids, people growing up as the only child often want many kids, I think. That's an interesting observation. Elvis always had a very full house, even when he was an only kid. But there were times when it was just him and Gladys. And then there was a time when it was just him and Gladys and Vernon. But he did live with a lot of people, in cramped quarters even. And it seems like he really enjoyed that, because that's the way that he patterned Graceland. He wanted a lot of people to be there with him. And Gunn says, Priscilla said she was the most well-kept secret in Hollywood, didn't she? She did say that. She said she read that in the paper after they got married. And yet Alan here says, hey, it's been many years. Just kind of throws it out there as if everybody knows it. So I don't know. He's not saying everybody did know it. I'm just surmising from the fact that, we haven't looked at articles from previous years. But it feels like if it would have been a scandal of the proportion that would have pressured Elvis to be married, then this guy would have spent a lot more time on this. But he just mentions it. And Gunn says maybe Elvis liked having all those people around because he missed his brother, his deceased twin, who was stillborn, Elvis Presley. And that's very possibly true. I can't argue with that anyway. I have no idea what a twin who never got to meet his twin would feel like, especially if he knew that the twin had existed. And Marion says, I've heard it very often with other male stars that they should marry in their best years. Elvis wasn't that young anymore, although still looking hot. So I think, Marion, you're saying that there's an age that's kind of the perfect age during the period for a male star to get married. A point where he transitions from eligible bachelor to a married family man. And it's just part of the career of these guys. And I would say that's probably true. Although I think in Elvis's case, there is this belief that because he was so popular with teenagers in the beginning, that in 1967, it's still teenagers that are driving his success. But I don't think that's true at all. Those teenagers from the 50s had grown up. There was a new batch of teenagers, I think, in the early 60s, but they were growing up as well. They were having children, and they still loved Elvis. And so I think they were transmitting that love to the newer generations, and that his fandom was now multi-generational. And it wouldn't, and I don't think he could have got married 2 years before or 2 years later. I don't know that it would have made any difference to his career. Now, did he fear that it would hurt his career? I don't know. They're reporting here that he did, but we don't have a statement from Elvis saying that. But maybe he truly did. I know that Elvis was eaten up with fears. He had a lot of fears and self-doubts. And that was part of his greatness, is that he was able to overcome all those fears and self-doubts. Oh, Mary is saying that they should not marry in their best years. But there would still be a point when they would. But Alan here seems to think that Elvis's desire for the family, for the kids, it's now overpowering whatever fears he has about the career. And so I wonder about that too. We did hear a direct quote from Elvis saying he wants the family, but it was from 2 years before. But Alan's linking that to this date and saying, hey, the desire has grown so much in the last 2 years, he's had to go through with this now. And Gunn says that for women, the age was a bigger deal because of having children, and that the men were never in such a hurry. That's true. That is also very true. I think that is slightly less true today because of medical science, but still very, very true. And Alan goes on Elvis had been keeping Priscilla from the public eye recently. Well, he's about to make a statement that destroys when I think, well, it's not when Elvis spoke, because Elvis still could have only spoke from April or before. But Alan must have filed this fairly late from my thinking of when these newspaper or magazine articles get printed, because he says although she has spent a lot of time with him on set on Speedway, his latest film with Nancy Sinatra, the filming has remained tightly closed to the press. And that almost nails down when he did write this intro or the article itself and then insert the quotes from Elvis, because this would have had to have been like last couple of weeks of June. Because at some point during this movie, Priscilla comes forward and tells everybody that she's pregnant. But when Alan's putting this article together, she has not yet said this. Because his next statement is, when their first baby comes along, Elvis will make an ideal father. He will make sure his children never lack paternal affection. But he's not saying that Priscilla's announced that she's pregnant. So it is interesting we can nail this down so precisely as to when he must have written this. Although when he talked to Elvis would have still had to have been back in April, because Elvis hasn't been around. And Alan says Elvis had even said how he would like his children to grow up. Elvis told me once that if he ever had a son, he would like him to go to college and, if possible, be a football star. So we know that Elvis always wanted to play football when he was in high school. Some people think that he couldn't play football in high school because he was afraid of the bigger boys, that he was afraid to get hit, or that Gladys was afraid that he would get hit and hurt. But none of that's actually true. I'm sure Gladys did fear, but that didn't stop Elvis from playing football. Elvis was on the team. And the coach says that the reason that Elvis could no longer play football, he said it was obvious to him. He said that Elvis was a poor kid, and his family was not doing well financially. And that there were many days when he noticed that Elvis was not eating lunch. And that at some point he asked Elvis about it. And Elvis told him he didn't have the money for lunch. So the coach started buying him lunch or loaning him the money to get lunch or something like that. He made sure that Elvis ate. And then after a couple of weeks into the, they choose the team. And then a couple of weeks in, Elvis came to him and he said, "Coach, I really love football and I want to play." But, and some people say the coach told him he had to get his hair cut. But again, the coach says that's not it. He says that Elvis told him, "I have to go to work at night so that I can earn some money so that my family can eat." And the coach knew this to be true because he knew Elvis had been skipping those lunches. And he knew he was buying some lunches for Elvis. And so he sent Elvis with his blessing to work. Because the coach said during those days, some kids had more important things to do than play football. And that's what Elvis was doing. But now that Elvis is a rich man, he wants his son to go to college, to play football in high school, to play football in college, which he watches college ball. Elvis loves college football. And to be a football star. Because Elvis watches the NFL too. Loves to watch football. And Allen says there are few keener football fans than Elvis in the film city. The film city being Hollywood. Allen says every chance Elvis gets, he plays touch football with members of his Memphis Mafia. Now, what Allen's not telling us here is that there are other members of Film City, Hollywood, California, who show up to play touch football with Elvis. People like Ricky Nelson and Max Baer. And of course, Ricky Nelson, another famous rock and roller, and Max Baer Jr., he's the guy who played Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hillbillies on TV. And that was around these times. And Jethro, Max Baer, he's a good-looking man. And so was Ricky. And so was Elvis. So can you imagine these three out there playing touch football? Now, they might have been wearing helmets. Elvis liked to bring helmets and gear. He liked to do it as right as he could. But these three handsome guys and all of Elvis's crew and maybe some other people they picked up in the area to make the full teams. And they'd spend the day, the whole afternoon playing touch football. And Marion says that Elvis invented football moves. He drew tactics on paper. He did. He did. And Gunn says that she's heard that Priscilla did not want more children. She said with a laugh, if Elvis wants more children, he's going to have them himself. I think there's good possibility that's true. She did have one more eventually, but it wasn't with Elvis. And Gunn says that she thinks Elvis missed a brother. And she's heard that Gladys used to lay the table for 4 persons. And Elvis, here's something that Elvis said himself about his child if he had a boy. Elvis says, I guess I'd buy my son a football as soon as he could walk. So Elvis had dreams about going out in the yard at Graceland, throwing the football around with his son. Maybe getting Vernon out there. Maybe getting Billy Smith, and they do a little bit of touch tackle of their own. And Allen says Presley's mother never allowed him to play football when he was a teenager because she was afraid he might get hurt. She obviously didn't realize how tough Elvis is. Allen probably has no idea that he's just restating the myth, but not the truth, because I just told you the truth. That Elvis had to go to work so that Gladys and Vernon and he could eat. And the coach knew it, because he saw Elvis needed food. And Allen says, when I asked Elvis how he would like his daughter to be, this is what Elvis said. Naturally, I'd like her to be pretty. And I'd also like her to grow up with strong religious values. Fathers and their daughters always seem to me to have a strong affection for each other, and I'm sure there would be no exception in my case. I'd also like any daughter of mine to have a college education. I never had much education, but I'm going to make sure my children don't miss out. So I think Elvis said a lot there. And I want to go back through it. And Gunn says Lisa Marie got a golf cart. Well, she had a golf cart that was assigned as hers. And it's the one that was kept charged and ready for her to drive around anytime she wanted when she was there on the grounds. So she did have a golf cart, one of the fleet of 10. So Elvis has said about a daughter, naturally, I'd like her to be pretty. That stands to reason. And he says, I'd like her to grow up with strong religious values. So that was the second thing. The first was her appearance. But he is a movie star. He's being asked about this in a movie star magazine. And he's saying, of course, she's got a good-looking dad and a good-looking mom, hoping this daughter's good-looking. But what's really important, which he throws in here second, is that he wants her to have strong religious values. He wants her to have a relationship with God. And so for those of you that are following my other series that's going on at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every day, we're looking through some religious texts and spiritual texts that Elvis read. Religion was important to him. Spirituality was important to him. And he wanted to pass that along to his daughter. And then he said, fathers and their daughters always seem to me to have a strong affection for each other. I'm sure there would be no exception in my case. So he wants there to be a strong love between him and his daughter. And I think with these words, I think he's modeling Dixie Locke's father, who Elvis spent some time with when he was dating Dixie. They would spend time at Dixie's house. And so he would have been able to see the way that Dixie and her father interacted. Now he has some other experience with this, with some other ladies, some other young ladies, but I think this is about those moments with Dixie and the way that her parents interacted with her, specifically her father, who had a lot of trust in Dixie and who placed a lot of trust in Elvis. And it seems as if Elvis upheld all that trust. He didn't break any of it. And Gunn says that Elvis did not like Scientology. No, I don't believe he did. I believe he saw it as a made-up religion or a made-up spirituality, which it is. It was invented by a science fiction writer. But people said that about Mormonism too, and it's still sticking around. So who am I to say? But I've read the man's other science fiction books, and when he was early in his days, L. Ron Hubbard, he was really good. Like, he had some really good stories, but he lost it towards the end. And his personal life was like a complete disaster. So why anybody would want to emulate this man, that's just, I don't know. But maybe you guys are Scientologists. So if you are, and you've got other opinions, feel free to put them into the chat. I can't guarantee any opinion will ever change one of mine, but all opinions are welcome here. And you can feel free to put them into the chat or into the comments, or just to let us know what you think, and we'll talk it all out. And be sure, while you're putting in a comment, to hit the like button, especially if you learned something about Elvis today that you didn't know before or had never heard before. And be sure that you share with all your friends who love Elvis, that they could come and join us here at Hillbilly Cat History twice a day, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do 2 hours a day right now. And Marion says, in an early interview, she thinks in the 50s, Elvis was asked, what would you like to teach your children? And he answered, to treat others like you yourself want to be treated. And that sure sounds like him. And Marion agrees that Elvis did not like Scientology. And Gunn points out that Elvis also had experience from a good mother-son relationship, not just father-daughter. That's absolutely right. But I think when he's thinking about a daughter, because he didn't have a sister, and I don't think he's modeling his grandfather, who was married to Minnie Mae, and because he would have remembered him as the father of Nash. And they probably had a special relationship, but I think he's thinking about Dixie and her dad. But I could be wrong. And Elvis also says, I'd like my daughter to have a college education. And he says, I never had much education, but I'm going to make sure my children don't miss out. So he doesn't say, I'm going to make my kids go to college. He says he's not going to let them miss out on college, that this is an opportunity that he never had and he wants them to have. And that is exactly the way that Gladys and Vernon raised Elvis. They did not have the education that Elvis had. Elvis was the very first to graduate high school in their family. They were so proud of him. And he says, that's not enough. My kids have to have it better than I had it. Just as his parents said, Elvis has to have it better than we did. And Gunn says that she also heard Elvis say several times about how to treat other people, as you would like to be treated yourself. And I think Elvis modeled that behavior most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, far more than most of us do. Now, we hear about some times when he didn't, but we hear about those because they're the exceptions to the rule. They happen so rarely that they stick out in people's minds. Because Elvis met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And so many of those walked away after just a few minutes thinking that they had a lifelong friend in Elvis Presley. But Elvis also has a very forward and progressive view of female education. He's not saying, it's only my son I'm going to send to college. Although he does indicate the college for his son's more about the football. So he's kind of into the sports for the guys, but he wants his daughter to be educated. He wants her to know things. I don't think every parent in the 60s would have thought that way about their female children. It was a far different time. And Gunn says that we call that the golden rule. That is also what it's called here. It's interesting to know that it's called the same thing in Sweden. But when you treat others as you treat yourself, that is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And Marion says that it's the most important thing to teach children. And Alan says Elvis has often spoken to other stars about his desire to have a family. Mariana Hill, one of Elvis's leading ladies in his film, Paradise Hawaiian Style, says, Elvis told me he would marry only once, and it would be forever. So I think we could say that Elvis went into this with the right attitude. He meant it to be forever. Whatever the reasons were that he did it, whether he was coerced or whether he wasn't, once he said I do, he fully committed, and he meant to be married forever. Now, there's going to come actions in the future that we'll have to look at and see if he maintained that commitment. But some would say that the partner in the relationship, well, they didn't honor their commitment first. But we're going to figure it all out together. But at the moment that he entered the marriage, according to Mariana Hill, this is what would have been on his mind, that he would marry only once and it would be forever. And she goes on. Elvis also told me he wanted a religious-minded girl for his wife. So I look at Priscilla and I try to understand if she was a religious-minded girl in the sense that Elvis would think that she was a religious-minded girl. And I do know that she attended church. I don't know how regularly, but I know that she went at least once with Donna Presley, that they attended different churches because Priscilla was Catholic. And they went to each other's church once. And so it's not clear to me whether Priscilla went often. But then, as has already been pointed out in the chat, after the divorce, Priscilla switches over to Scientology, which I don't know if we could call that religious or not. I think that's very debatable. Or religious-minded. Yeah, that's very debatable to me. So I don't know if he got what he was looking for on that one. But Mariana goes on and she says, a girl who would not only make him a good wife, but also a good mother for the many children he hoped to have. That's an interesting line too, because a good wife to be a good mother. And I'm not sure that any of the fans would judge in the end that she had been a good wife. And because of Lisa's recent book, you know, prior to Lisa's book, I think that what we had was a lot of people that didn't like each other, that talked about each other. So it was very difficult to determine if she was or was not a good mother to Lisa. But once Lisa published that book, I think most people's opinions are swayed that she was not a good mother based on Lisa's words. And so again, I'm not sure that Elvis got what he was looking for with that one. He certainly didn't get many children, as he hoped. But Mariana says what lucky kids they will be. And there's truth there. I think Lisa Marie was very lucky. I think she had a lot of tragedy in her life. But I think there was also some luckiness there. And Mariana says Elvis just has to be the most wonderful father any kid could have. He absolutely adores kids, and they absolutely adore him. I watched him on the set when we were making Paradise Hawaiian Style, and it was fascinating to see the way he got along with any kid that came around. And I think he's chosen the right time to approach fatherhood. He's settled down now and is mature enough to take on the responsibility of a family man. And Gunn says that she's sure that Elvis had the best intentions entering the marriage. And that there were too many money and power involved people in Scientology for being a religion. That it doesn't sound good to her. I would absolutely agree with that. I think there's more about tax implications and corporate structures than there is about religion. But I gotta, can't say too much. They'll shut us down here. So I'm just kidding. Yeah. I'm sure nobody from Scientology is listening to my broadcast. But Mariana thought that this was a good time for him to get married. And Alan says Elvis plays the role of a stock car racing champion, and Nancy Sinatra plays a tax collector assigned to get a cut of his prize money. And Elvis has plenty of chances to dote on the children on the set of Speedway because there's 4 little girls in this cast. And this movie, Presley's longest yet, is directed by Norman Taurog, one of Elvis's closest friends, and the man who had directed him in 7 other films. The director is very happy about Elvis's marriage and agrees that Elvis would make a wonderful father. Says Taurog, children cement a marriage. They are not the only reason for marriage, of course, and I don't think children can hold a marriage together unless the parents truly love each other. There's no doubt Elvis and Priscilla truly love each other. And that's the way the director of Speedway and 7 other Elvis films thinks about Elvis and Priscilla, that they truly loved each other. And that's all we've got time for today. And Gunn says Scientology cult? Well, that's a whole nother episode. But for today, we've reached the end, and when we return, I will probably be on the set of Speedway. Although, I got a bunch of Circle G stories we might tell first. Because I'm not really sure if they come back or when they come back to the Circle G. The timeline's getting more and more confusing as we move through 1967, so I gotta spend some time straightening it out. And while I do that, I'm gonna leave you guys with this song. And it's gonna be his heart's desire about another time Elvis told us that he was looking to get married and have kids. And to all of you, until I see you again, hopefully 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow, you all keep on taking care of business.
His time came too early, the curtain fell too fast. Before he was ready, before we could grasp the man behind the myth, the ache behind the fame. He wanted something simple, not fortune, not acclaim. 6-3, the threats came down like rain. He spoke of love, not fear, through the shadow and the strain. I wanna live to be old, he said with quiet grace, to remember her love and see our children's face. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home, to be a good man with a heart that could rest, to know he was loved and he'd given in his best. no mansion in the sky, no diamond parade, just the warmth of her hand and the life they made. A whisper of laughter, a child's sleepy sigh, that was the dream he carried inside. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home, to be a good man with a heart that could rest, to know